Not the gentle creak of winter's arrival, but a tortured shriek of pressure, thousands of tons of Arctic pack ice grinding against iron-reinforced oak. In the perpetual twilight of September 1846, two ships lie trapped in Victoria Strait, their hulls squeezed in a vice that tightens with each passing hour. HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, vessels that have sailed to both ends of the earth, that have survived collisions with icebergs and storms that would shatter ordinary ships, now sit motionless in a frozen sea. Below deck on HMS Terror, 63 men huddle in the darkness. The ship's heating system hisses and rattles, fighting against temperatures that plunge to 40 below zero. They tell themselves this is temporary, the ice will break. The passage will open. They will sail home to England as heroes, having conquered the last unexplored section of the Northwest Passage. They are wrong. What transforms a state-of-the-art Royal Navy expedition into a graveyard? How do 129 well-supplied men vanish into the white silence? And what happened during those final, desperate years when the ice refused to release its prisoners? To understand the tragedy that unfolds in the Arctic, we must first travel to England in 1845, where ambition and empire intersect at the Admiralty Office in London. Sir John Franklin stands before a map of the Arctic, his finger tracing the gap, the last unknown section of the Northwest Passage. At 59 years old, Franklin is well past the age when most men contemplate polar exploration. His face is weathered, his hairline receding, his frame growing stout, but his eyes burn with the hunger of a man who has spent his life seeking one more adventure, one final triumph to crown a distinguished naval career. Franklin is a veteran of Arctic exploration. He has led two previous overland expeditions to the Canadian Arctic expeditions that ended in disaster, with men starving and rumors of cannibalism that Franklin vehemently denied. His critics call him the man who ate his boots, a reference to the leather footwear consumed during his first expedition. But Franklin has powerful friends.
Indeed.
His wife, Lady Jane Franklin, is a formidable woman with connections that reach into the highest levels of the Admiralty. When the assignment to find the Northwest Passage becomes available, Franklin wants it desperately. The Admiralty initially hesitates. He is too old, they say, too heavy for the rigors of Arctic travel. But Lady Jane Franklin campaigns relentlessly, and eventually the appointment is his. The expedition will consist of two ships, HMS Erebus, which Franklin will command, and HMS Terror under the experienced Captain Francis Crozier. These are not ordinary vessels. Both are former bomb ships, built with massively reinforced hulls designed to withstand the recoil of heavy mortar. They have already proven themselves in the Antarctic, having sailed farther south than any ships before them under James Clark Ross for the Franklin expedition. Both vessels undergo extensive retrofitting. Iron plating is added to the bows. Steam engines and propellers, cutting-edge technology in 1845 are installed, making them among the first polar exploration ships with auxiliary power. An intricate heating system runs through the decks. The ships are provisioned for 3 years, carrying 136,656 pounds of flour, 33,289 pounds of tinned meats, 9,450 pounds of chocolate, and vast quantities of lemon juice to prevent scurvy. Captain Francis Crozier is a study in contrast to Franklin. Where Franklin is affable and optimistic, Crozier is dour and pragmatic. An Irishman in the English Royal Navy, he has fought his entire career for recognition that comes easily to others. He is 49 years old, unmarried after a rejected marriage proposal, and carries an air of perpetual melancholy. But no man knows polar exploration better. Crozier has sailed to both the Arctic and Antarctic multiple times. He commanded HMS Terror during the Ross Antarctic expedition, and he understands ice better than perhaps any officer in the Royal Navy. Crozier is skeptical about the expedition from the beginning. He believes they are sailing too late in the season. He worries about Franklin's optimism overriding caution. He writes letters expressing his concerns, but they go unheeded. What Crozier does not know, what no one knows, is that his skepticism will prove tragically prescient. The expedition departs England on May 19, 1845. Crowds gather at the docks to witness the departure of what newspapers call the best-equipped expedition ever to leave these shores. The ships carry 134 officers and men, later reduced to 129 after 5 men are sent home from Greenland. The crew includes engineers, scientists, surgeons, and even an ice master men specifically trained to read the behavior of Arctic ice. As they sail north, Franklin writes cheerful letters. On July 12th, they encounter 2 whaling ships in Baffin Bay, the Prince of Wales and the Enterprise. Franklin and several officers visit the whalers, sharing provisions and conversation. Franklin is in high spirits. On July 28, 1845, the whaling ship Enterprise spots Erebus and Terror moored to an iceberg in Lancaster Sound, waiting for favorable conditions to continue west. The crews wave to each other across the water. This is the last confirmed sighting of Franklin's ships. The 2 vessels sail into the ice-choked waters of the Canadian Arctic archipelago and vanish. 3 years of provisions. The finest equipment the Royal Navy can provide. Chapter 1. Into the Labyrinth. The early months proceed according to plan. Franklin chooses a route that takes them west through Lancaster Sound. Then south down Peel Sound, a choice that will seal their fate, though they do not yet know it. The expedition makes camp for their first winter at Beechey Island, a small, desolate outcrop off the southwestern tip of Devon Island. Here, 75 degrees north of the equator, the men prepare for months of darkness. They set up an observatory for magnetic readings, organize theatrical performances to maintain morale. The winter is harsh but manageable. 3 men, Petty Officer John Torrington, Royal Marine Private William Brain, and able seaman John Hartnell. The official cause is listed as pneumonia and tuberculosis, though the deaths raise questions. 3 men in 1 winter, is this normal mortality, or is something wrong? When the ice breaks in the summer of 1846, the expedition departs Beechey Island and continues south. Franklin believes they are on the verge of success. Once they map this final gap, they can either continue west to the Pacific or return to England as heroes. Franklin's journals, which will never be recovered, likely brim with optimism, but the ice has other plans. As Erebus and Terror sail down the western coast of King William Island, the Arctic ice begins its annual freeze earlier and more aggressively than expected. The ships become trapped in Victoria Strait, roughly 15 miles northwest of King William Island. At first, this seems like a minor setback. The ships have been frozen in before. The ships are supplied for 3 years. They have heating systems, libraries full of books, tinned food in abundance. But as the weeks pass and autumn deepens into the endless night of Arctic winter, a troubling reality emerges. They are not in a protected harbor. They are trapped in open water that has frozen solid, surrounded by pack ice that shifts and grinds with the currents and winds. The pressure is immense. At night, the men lie in their hammocks listening to the hull groan and creak. Sometimes the noise is so loud they bolt upright, certain the ship is being crushed. He knows that even their reinforced hulls have limits. He likely counsels Franklin to prepare for the possibility that the ships may never sail again, but Franklin, ever optimistic, likely resists such pessimism. The darkness of Arctic winter descends. From November through February, the sun never rises. The heating systems run constantly, burning through coal reserves. The temperature inside the ships hovers just above freezing, far warmer than the 40 and 50 below zero outside. Chapter 3. The first summer 1847, June 1847, arrives, the month when the ice should break. The sun returns, climbing higher each day, bringing temperatures above freezing, but the ice does not break. The ships remain locked in place. The pressure continues. The men can walk on the frozen sea, can see the dark water leads in the distance, but Erebus and Terror cannot move. On June 11, 1847, something happens that changes everything. Sir John Franklin dies. The official record, recovered years later, simply states, Sir John Franklin died on the 11th of June 1847. No cause is given, no elaboration. A man who survived Arctic expeditions, naval battles, and decades of service dies at age 61 aboard his flagship. Was it a heart attack, pneumonia, lead poisoning from the tinned food? The mystery endures. Command passes to Francis Crozier, the man who doubted this expedition from the beginning. Now he is responsible for 128 men on 2 ships trapped in ice that shows no sign of releasing them. Crozier is a competent leader, but he inherits a deteriorating situation. By the time of Franklin's death, other men have died as well, 9 officers and 15 men in total, according to later records. The death rate is alarming. These are not old men or weak men. They are Royal Navy sailors in their physical prime. Yet they are dying at a rate of nearly 1 per month. Chapter 4. The Long Winter 1847-1848. The second winter frozen in the ice is psychologically devastating. The men now understand they are not merely delayed, they are trapped. The ships will not sail home. Their only hope is that the ice will break in the summer of 1848, allowing them to escape. Scurvy begins to appear. Despite the lemon juice in their provisions, men's gums begin to bleed. Teeth loosen, old wounds reopen. Scurvy is a terrible disease. It does not just weaken the body, it destroys the mind. Men become paranoid, despondent, convinced they will never see home again. The tinned food presents another problem. The expedition purchased its provisions from the lowest bidder, a company that sealed the tins with lead solder. It begins with fatigue and irritability, then progresses to confusion, tremors, and organ failure. The men likely do not recognize the symptoms. They assume they are suffering from the cold, from scurvy, from the stress of confinement. Crozier makes a fateful decision sometime during this second winter. If the ice does not break in the summer of 1848, they will abandon the ships and march south to the mainland, following the coast to the Back River, where they hope to find food and eventually make contact with Hudson's Bay Company trading posts. It is a desperate plan. The distance is over 400 miles, much of it across sea ice and barren tundra. The men are already weakened by scurvy and lead poisoning. They will have to drag boats mounted on sleds, carrying as many provisions as they can pull. But what choice do they have? Remaining on the ships means certain death. Chapter 5. Abandonment. April 1848. When spring arrives in April, 1848, the ice still has not broken. The ships have now been trapped for 19 months. The decision is made. They will abandon Erebus and Terror and attempt to march to safety. On April 22, 1848, Captain Crozier and Commander James Fitzjames Franklin, second in command, who now serves as Crozier's executive officer, lead the evacuation. A party of men had been sent ahead days earlier to cache supplies and prepare the route. Now the remaining crew, 105 men. According to the record, they leave behind, prepare to abandon the ships that have been their home for nearly 3 years. The first part, dated May 28, 1847, is optimistic. It reports that the expedition wintered at Beechy Island and that all well. But around the margins, in cramped handwriting, Crozier and Fitzjames add a second message dated April 25, 1848. Ships Erebus and Terror were deserted on the 22nd of April, 5 leagues NNW of this, having been beset since the 12th of September 1846. Sir John Franklin died on the 11th of June 1847, and the total loss by deaths in the expedition has been to this date 9 officers and 15 men. Start tomorrow, 26th, for Backsfish River. This note, discovered 11 years later by a search expedition, is the last written communication from Franklin's men. Its margins are cramped, the handwriting hurried. It reads like what it is, a desperate message left by men who know they may never be found. 105 men, hauling boats mounted on heavy wooden sledges, begin dragging their supplies across the ice toward King William Island. Each sledge weighs over 1,000 pounds. The men are already weakened by scurvy, lead poisoning, and starvation. The temperature hovers below freezing even in late April. Inuit hunters later report seeing long lines of white men dragging boats across the ice. The Inuit approach cautiously, but the men wave them away. They do not ask for help. They do not seek to learn from the indigenous people who have survived in this landscape for millennia. Royal Navy pride or perhaps desperation prevents them from adapting to Arctic survival strategies. As the march continues, men begin to die with increasing frequency. They collapse on the ice and are left behind. There is no energy to bury them, no wood for coffins in this treeless wasteland. The supplies that seemed so important, the books, the silverware, the officers' writing desks found later by search parties, are gradually abandoned as the men realize they are carrying their own graves. Some groups splinter off from the main party. Archaeological evidence suggests that some men returned to the ships, perhaps hoping to find shelter or additional food. Others continued south, driven by the faint hope that they would reach the mainland and find salvation. But salvation never comes. The Canadian Arctic is a desert of rock and ice. The men are dying of scurvy, starvation, hypothermia, and lead poisoning. Their bodies are literally consuming themselves. By the summer of 1848, the Franklin expedition has ceased to exist as an organized entity. Small groups of men, and perhaps individuals, stagger south along the western and southern coasts of King William Island. Inuit testimony collected years later paints a haunting picture. White men with blackened faces and swollen gums, their skin peeling from scurvy, wandering aimlessly across the tundra. Some Inuit families encounter abandoned camps with bodies lying frozen in the snow. Others find boats filled with bizarre supplies, silk handkerchiefs, silver spoons, religious books, but little food. The grim reality of cannibalism emerges from both Inuit testimony and later archaeological evidence. Cut marks on bones found at various camps indicate that some men, driven mad by starvation, turned to consuming the bodies of their dead companions. This is not a moral failing, it is the final extremity of men whose bodies are shutting down from malnutrition. The human mind will do anything to survive. No one knows the fate of Francis Crozier. Inuit oral history includes stories of white men living with native families for a time, but these accounts are fragmentary and disputed. Some historians believe Crozier was among the last survivors, using his experience to extend his life. Others believe he died early in the march. His body has never been definitively identified. The last confirmed sighting by the Inuit describes a group of approximately 40 white men dragging a boat near the mouth of the Back River, the destination Crozier had aimed for, but they never reached the Hudson's Bay Company posts. They simply vanished into the vast expanse of the Canadian Arctic. Not a single man survived. 129 officers and men, an entire expedition erased from the earth for over a decade. Lady Jane Franklin, refusing to accept her husband's death, financed multiple search expeditions. Ships sailed through every navigable channel of the Arctic searching for traces. In 1854, explorer John Rae encountered Inuit hunters who possessed objects from the expedition's silver spoons, naval buttons, fragments of uniforms. The Inuit told Rae stories of starving white men, of bodies found with flesh removed from the bones. When Rae reported these findings to England, he was vilified. The idea that Royal Navy men would resort to cannibalism was unthinkable to Victorian society. Lady Franklin led a campaign against Rae, defending her husband's honor. In 1859, an expedition led by Captain Francis Leopold McClintock finally discovered physical evidence. On King William Island, McClintock's party found the Victory Point note skeletons scattered along the coast, and a boat containing 2 skeletons surrounded by an absurd collection of supplies: silk handkerchiefs, scented soap, slippers, a copy of the Vicar of Wakefield. The boat was pointed north back toward the ships, suggesting these men had abandoned the southern march and attempted to return. The discoveries confirmed what Rae had reported. The expedition had ended in catastrophic failure. But they provided few answers. What killed Franklin? Why did the ships become so trapped? What exactly happened during those final months? For 170 years, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror remained lost beneath the Arctic ice, their exact locations unknown. Then, in 2014, a search expedition using modern sonar technology discovered the wreck of Erebus in the eastern Queen Maud Gulf, south of where it had been abandoned. In 2016, the wreck of Terror was found in Terror Bay. How did the ships drift so far south from where they were abandoned? Were some crew members still aboard months or even years later, unable or unwilling to continue the march? The closed hatches on Terror suggest that someone carefully secured the ship before finally abandoning it. Modern analysis of remains recovered from the expedition confirms lead poisoning and scurvy as contributing factors. The tinned food meant to sustain the men slowly poisoned them. The lemon juice meant to prevent scurvy had lost its efficacy. The ships designed to withstand ice became prisons. But perhaps the greatest factor was pride. The Royal Navy's conviction that British technology and discipline could conquer any environment prevented the men from adapting, from learning from the Inuit, from accepting that their carefully planned expedition had failed. Traveling light and hunting seals thrived in the same landscape. Today, the wrecks of Erebus and Terror are protected sites, grave markers for 129 men who sailed into the Arctic seeking glory and found only ice and silence. Their story remains one of the most haunting tragedies in the history of exploration, reminder that the natural world does not care about ambition, about empire, about the best-laid plans of men. In the end, the Arctic did not conquer the Franklin expedition. The expedition conquered itself through hubris, through miscalculation, through an unwillingness to adapt. The ice simply waited, patient, indifferent, eternal, if you found this story compelling. There are many more forgotten tales of survival and tragedy waiting to be told, stories of men and women who pushed beyond the edges of the known world and discovered the limits of human endurance.